Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Short notice, really appreciate it. Welcome to Praxis. This is my movement studio. Very different use of the studio, but you know, it's another kind of movement, so it's exciting to have people here. Zing, won't use that one again. I'd like to start by acknowledging we're meeting on Ngunnawal country and acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land that take care of this incredible place that we call home. Hopefully you're like me and you feel fortunate to live here and fortunate to live in a place that's so beautiful, naturally beautiful. You know, I think it's something that we should do everything we can to protect and make the most of. Thank all of you for being here. Thank you, Sue, for coming along. I thought I'd give, just for everyone, a very brief update on what's been happening. Some people are across what's been happening, some people aren't. This is quite, by the way, quite an arrangement that you've got set up, very elaborate. So in terms of the campaign, when we announced we were doing this, 3 months ago, we were hoping that some incredible candidates would come forward and think that this is a good idea and an important thing to be a part of. I think that's happened. I don't just think it, I'm confident that's happened, and I'm hearing from a lot of people who feel the same way, which is incredibly exciting. There was a huge amount of uncertainty at that time, you know, who knows? But to me, it's clear that we're doing something that needs to be done. Candidates are putting themselves forward. That's an incredible place to start. That's been our focus. So some of the things that people have been asking, whether or not we've done them or thought about them, mostly we've thought about them, but that'll be the next stage that we move into. So a couple of things we'll be doing once we have candidates finalized, which should happen the next week or two, is then focusing on developing a bit of a shared policy platform. Some shared policy priorities might be one way of thinking about it. We've already shared a little bit of what we've been hearing at our town halls, which is on the website in a section we've called Our Vision, but fleshing that out and speaking to the existing policy positions of other parties and making clear what it is that we think independents can achieve in October and beyond. And then also fundraising is going to be another thing that we have to focus on to build up a little bit of a war chest to spread the t-shirts aren't free. This piece of fabric isn't free. To start spreading the word, that's going to be really key for us to boost awareness of what we're doing. For me, it's especially important that we connect with the people who aren't already engaged with politics, which is probably the vast majority, right? If you're here, perhaps you already are. And so, you know, it's easy to get stuck in our echo chamber of think, oh, the government, we all know that we need something different. Lots of people don't know that. Or maybe they're not seeing what they want in their lives happen and just need to be connected with so that we have an opportunity to say, look, something different is possible and the things that you're concerned about can be reflected by your representatives and acted on, most importantly. Very quickly, the process that we've been through on the candidate kind of front has been, we've got a candidate endorsement committee, none of whom are running, a kind of independent entity that we set up to gauge alignment with our 10 shared principles, which are on the website. Things like not pursuing vested interests, no fringe agendas, focusing on what the community really wants us focusing on, evidence-based policy, working hard to actually deliver results, collaborating, which is a really important one and a challenge for us as independents, but then also independence, which means we can disagree and do so in an ongoing way without it meaning that you're booted out of out of the group. So the endorsement committee has spoken with all of the prospective candidates, interviewed them essentially to get an early sense of alignment with the principles. And now this part of the stage is for us to see how people engage with the community and whether they still reflect those principles. After this one, I think Sue will be our last prospective candidate. That group's going to get together, make sure they finalize their decisions very quickly, and then we'll be in a position in the next few weeks to announce the candidates in each electorate. Hopefully that's helpful and new information for at least some people. How to provide feedback on today. Get in touch with us, speak with, you can speak with me, you can speak with Lee. Lee, do you mind putting your hand up? You can speak with Rob. Rob, put your hand up. Lee and Rob are on the endorsement committee. I'm a prospective candidate, I'm not, but I can pass your feedback on if you want to chat with me. And then also by email, contact@independenceforcanberra.com. It could be feedback about Sue, judgments about Sue, It could be feedback about how we're doing things, how you like to see things done better in general. I think that's it. Should be obvious, we're filming. If you don't want to be filmed, if you don't mind putting your hand up, you won't be generally, but when we go to questions, there'll be a time for questions. Yeah, yeah. Now you're going to have to formally give consent to be filmed. We don't have a microphone to amplify Sue. I didn't want to do that because the space gets really echoey. So if we have it amplified, then it becomes kind of harder to hear. But Sue, you're just going to have to speak loudly if that's okay. Do you want to come a little bit closer as well? Maybe we could do that. Rob, would you mind helping? Is that okay? Okay. So let me introduce Sue. Sue Reid is a proud Canberran who is passionate about creating healthy communities. She grew up in Canberra and went on to study psychology and neuroscience at the ANU and completed her qualifications to become a registered psychologist. From the age of 5, Sue has had sport running through her veins. She boasts a remarkable athletic background across several sports, showcasing her determination and discipline on the field. As an elite athlete in track and field, she excelled in discus and javelin, gaining several titles and records that still have not been broken. Additionally, Sue was a national weightlifting champion, and her athleticism also extended to the soccer pitch, where she served as a goalkeeper for the Australian national women's soccer team, the Matildas. Her experiences as a high-performance athlete have instilled in her a deep understanding of the importance of mental strength, teamwork, resilience, and leadership in achieving her goals both on and off the field. Sue became passionate about the area of preventative health and wellness following some severe injuries and illnesses that effectively cut short her elite sporting career. In 1999, Sue started her own health and psychology practice, Life Unlimited Psychology, what a name. And she has dedicated the last 25 years to clinical practice and assisting individuals and organizations to attain optimal health. Her off-field pursuits include providing pro bono psychological support to the Canberra Capital's WNBL team, as well as appearing on ABC Radio Canberra as our city's very own resident psychologist. Most recently, Sue turned her attention to launching and running the Save Canberra United campaign, successfully, I might add. They've been saved, and worked tirelessly to keep our beloved A-League women's soccer team here in the heart of Canberra through a crowdfunding campaign and lobbying government for additional funding. Sue's passion has always been to contribute to her community in a positive way and to assist in creating change. She currently lives with a partner of 19 years, Julia, and their chocolate Labrador, Jack. Their now grown daughter, Erin, lives in Kayleen. Sue Reid.
Thank you. That was the speech, just so you know. That was it. Thank you. And I do want to say thank you so much for everyone coming out on a Sunday afternoon. I had a little surgery the other day, and I thought it would have been pretty amusing for me to try and talk under the sedative, but I'll leave that for when I run for federal politics and end up slurring my speech somewhere. And thank you so much, Tom, for creating this space for us this afternoon. I really appreciate it. And I'm here to run as a prospective candidate for Ginninderra in the upcoming ACT election. I do also just want to point out probably some alliances. Like, I only met Tom maybe a month ago, maybe not even that. I had heard about him from lots of my own clients who have come here to work on their physical and mental well-being or in their own injuries over many years. And the more I heard from them and then chatting to Tom, the more I realised how much we had in common. We both suffered from chronic pain. We both wanted to heal ourselves, essentially, and then turn what we'd learnt into helping other people around us and moving that into our business space. And then I think also this sense of understanding the alliance of needing to step in when things need to be done differently. I'm very happy if someone can do a job better than me, that they go ahead and do it. I think what we've all been hearing is that it's probably time for some different representation, and these ideals around integrity, around really proper representation of people is something I align really strongly with. So we have a lot of similarities. I have decided to keep my hair at this point. That may change, I'm not sure. That's right. Today, though, in the first part of time that we've got, and obviously we'll have time for questions, rather than outlining policies, as was mentioned, it's a little bit more about understanding me, like what I think brings me and the qualities I have to be able to represent our community. As a psychologist, I'm actually more comfortable asking other people questions and listening to them. So I'll try and talk a bit about myself, but then also about the approach I would take, the values I have, and how I think that can represent our community. So that's probably part of the aim of that. I think firstly, so much of what's shaped me as a person has come from fundamentally living and engaging in every part of the community in Canberra. I've tried to get out a few times, but I've discovered you just can't do it. You keep coming back here. I went to school here, Lynham High School, Dixon College, ANU, and of course started my business here. And you may be surprised that I started that in 1999. So I just want to point out, I qualified as a psychologist at the age of 12, just in case you're wondering. And really, you know, with everything that I have been doing, my life already is quite meaningful and full. So the idea to step into politics is not a decision that I've taken lightly. I think, like I said, it's about, I don't need politics to do anything for me. Certainly not the pay, from what I've heard. Not about other things. Really, it comes from a deep sense of wanting to serve the community in some way. And I can remember from a very young age, all I've really wanted to do is to make people's lives better or their community better in some way. And I think that's really where I think true politics at a grassroots level should be about connecting with people and representing them appropriately and being able to bring some good values into that space. So that's really kind of why I'm doing this. And as mentioned, sport's always been a big part of my life. I think there are many things I can take away from working in that elite physical environment that really do, I think, give me good insights for how do we achieve in different realms of life. So sport really is a training ground for lots of other areas of our lives that we go into. What I learned in elite level sport is that if you want to be good at anything, you do have to develop a few key skills. You need to have a certain element of discipline. You need to have an element of dedication, perseverance, resilience. There are many things you have to do that are quite difficult and boring day to day. Getting up and training hard 5 hours a day, every day for 20 years of your life is not always that fun. And I also know there's a lot of things you have to say no to in order to pursue and be excellent in one realm of life. I think if you're not really clearly aligned with why you're showing up, so what your values are, what your meaning is, and what your purpose is, it becomes very difficult to do the day-to-day activities. So for me, this idea, anything I do, business life, work, engaging with people, it's really about getting clear on the sense of meaning and purpose and values, knowing that the stuff itself is quite hard. There's a lot of work to do. Certainly as a party, there's a lot of work to do in different realms of things in Canberra. But when we're driven by our values, that can push us through those difficult realms. And I think that's something that I've certainly taken away from that space. And I think that sense of values is certainly what's helped me align with, I think does align quite well with the values and principles of the Independence for Canberra Party. That's why I'm here in this space. Probably the one other thing I would say that I took away from sport is really understanding that it doesn't matter how talented you are individually as a person. If you don't have a good group of people around you, if you don't have good leaders and mentors, and if you can't take on board feedback from those people, you do not reach your full potential. So it's even in an individual sport, it's always about the meaningful relationships that you are able to develop over time. And that's what really leads to success. And I think there's a lot of alignment there when we look at something like the field of business or politics. And certainly in the psychological realm, I could talk about that for a long time, but the couple of key takeaways from working in psychology and neuroscience at an individual and a group level, certainly it's about deeply listening to the heart of what's happening for other people. Very often it's about trying to either educate, motivate, or bring people together. Certainly when I work in organizations with people, not everybody agrees, so you're trying to bring them together. It's always coming from a space of non-judgment and from empathy. And I think the other element of psychology is it's really about applying evidence-based principles. We don't just show up and hope that we do a good job. You've got to really understand what you're doing, apply that in quite a rigorous way to help motivate or engage some kind of behavioral change in people. So I think that element of evidence-based to me, certainly when I work in different areas of government or with different areas of government, we don't always see evidence being applied or what really properly makes sense. So that's something I'm quite passionate about. And then I think in Canberra for many years, we probably had been reasonably content with the government that we had. What I've started to notice maybe the last 8 years is that starting to change and hearing a different story. I think certainly before the last election, I was quite shocked that the government got back in because I had heard so many disgruntled people around. We were in COVID times, so of course you're probably not going to go for a change at that point. But this last few years, I've again been hearing people feeling increasingly disgruntled, forgotten, not listened to, left behind. I think that we've started to feel like perhaps our government's become a little more complacent. And instead of consulting and really listening, there can sometimes be a sense of disconnect and almost arrogance that we've been hearing about. And so that's where I think it's opened up this space that why we need a change at this point in time. Now, I'm certainly not going to pretend that it's simple to balance all the various needs of a city like Canberra. We have a limited financial base. We have a lot of complex things we're trying to do. But I do believe we can probably do those slightly differently, and that we've got to really utilize the skills and the expertise we have to do that effectively in this space. And I think that's where we can make some difference and some inroads. I was really surprised, I think, or not surprised, because I listen to ABC radio every day, so I hear everything people are saying. But I think on reflection, just realizing that in Canberra, which I think should be the safest, healthiest, happiest place on the planet. Like, if we can't do that here, where can you do that? But to hear that we're getting further and further behind in some really key areas in our community. So firstly, people feeling disconnected, disempowered and disgruntled. And I think understanding that when we feel like we don't have a sense of agency, that's one of the worst places we can be in psychologically. When we start to feel like the world is happening to us, and particularly if government is doing things to us, we start to spiral downwards, often into a space of feeling helpless or hopeless, and not feeling like we'll be engaged or invested to make changes for ourselves or in our environment. And to hear that we have mental health issues higher than other jurisdictions in the country is quite shocking. To recognise that we have literacy rates that have become worse over the last 20 years, and that now 1 in 3 15-year-olds do not meet the basic standards of proficiency in reading and similarities in numeracy, you know, that starts to be quite shocking when we think about it in a space like Canberra. I'll touch on some of the other areas. Of course, the health system is one of those. Housing, there's all the topics that we're all quite aware of. What I really do believe in any of these areas is listening to and fighting for what communities believe in. As Tom mentioned recently, I had a really good experience of people-powered mobilisation with the Save Canberra United campaign. Does everyone know who Canberra United is? Yes, and if you haven't donated yet, it's QR code over here, but Canberra United is, it's our elite level women's football, although no one knows what that is, so soccer team. We are one of the most successful teams in the history of the competition. We've produced the most number of Matildas out of nearly any team in Australia, and we were looking at folding our team due to a range of reasons, but one of the key ones was really a chronic underfunding of money into women's sport. And there's a whole range of issues and concerns around that. So what we did in a very short space of time was put a call out, and some of these people are here, to, again, call on Canberrans who were willing to donate time and energy. We created a not-for-profit organisation, social media platforms, lobbied government, set up a crowdfunding page. And in the last 4 weeks, we've raised over $81,000. We've lobbied government and successfully achieved an additional funding amount of $200,000, talk to all the different parts of government. And I think we have saved our team, but what that really highlighted is when you listen to people and you're able to really properly take action, we can see change very rapidly. And we have those skills and expertise here in Canberra. Before I get kicked off, I was going to try and say 2 things. No one can stop me, so it's fine. The bigger issues I think that we're facing as a city, as I said, both the broader ones around the health system, but also local issues. I'm hearing more people want good accessibility to the buildings and the spaces they're in. We want our footpaths fixed. We want the fields and amenities to have proper maintenance, as well as thinking of these higher level things. The one thing I really want to mention that I'm really passionate about is our health system. I think we currently, of course, have very high wait times for emergency. We have issues in terms of getting into GPs. I think we need a philosophical shift in the way we do healthcare. At the moment, what we have is an illness treatment model. We do not have a health system. And what we really need to look at is a shift into prevention and early intervention. We know for every dollar we spend in prevention, we get a return of somewhere between $14 to $27 for not having to spend at the emergency end of the spectrum. And this is closely tied for me to our rates of loneliness. If we look at one variable in our community, 40% of Canberrans say that they experience a deep sense of loneliness regularly. And we know that people experience loneliness have a higher impact on the health system, mental and physical health, earlier rates of death from all-cause mortality, increased risk of heart disease, autoimmune conditions, a whole range of impacts on the health system. If we start addressing things at this end of the spectrum versus at the emergency end, which is not sustainable, we start to be able to deal with it in a fundamentally different way. And of course, there's lots of complexity around that, but I think that's one of the areas, for example, we could start to think of quite differently and engage with quite differently. I will say in summary, yes, that we are done. So I'm very happy to have questions and delve into those a little bit more, but hopefully that gives you a little snapshot of what values and what perspective that I bring. So, yes, thank you.
Briefly, we are streaming, so if you want to ask a question, I'll have to hand you this.
So I'll hold this here, please. So good to hear you. Very nice. Very impressed with your profile, experiences. 3 things to share with you. Number 1 is, according to new boundaries, Kaylin is now in Yarraby. So it's gone to Yarraby. So family and friends, you yourself won't be able to vote for yourself.
Oh, and I don't live in, my daughter lives in Kaylin.
Okay.
So that was just something at the start.
Yeah.
Not
and
but yeah.
Question 1 is, you mentioned disgruntled word in your speech, and I was thinking, when you go out in campaigning, you, as an independent party candidate, you may face lots of disgruntled people, very strong hatred, verbal abuse, all those things. So how you're going to tackle that? Now, second question is how you're going to balance your professional and personal life along with your campaign, because time is now the very important factor for next 4 or 5 months. So.
Yes, I've allocated Sundays to politics. Really good questions, and already, like I've just played soccer this morning and quickly took a poll of the team about what is it you care about. There is a lot of disgruntlement, I think, but again, when you open it up to listen to people and actually allow them to be heard, a lot of that anger can be expelled, and then you actually hear what's really happening. Hopefully they're not disgruntled with me, because I haven't been in government, so that's great. Give that another 4 years. But I think, again, we feel really disempowered when we don't feel heard. Even if, and I've heard this a lot, when you're consulting with people, even if you can't do what they've said, if you come back and circle back and give feedback and explain why you're doing what you're doing, people are more likely to come along for the ride. We know this in organisations. If you ask people what they want and you don't do it, morale goes down. So either just say it's a dictatorship, I'm doing what I want, and that's the way it is, or properly consult, properly give feedback, educate and have understanding, and then we can move people forward. So there is that, and then that's something that I think really comfortable with dealing with. And you're right, I have to make some very clear decisions about where I invest time and energy. So that's been the most stressful thing about this. I think representation is something I'm really passionate about. Realigning priorities, that's a big part of it. Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Uh-oh.
Hi, Sue. I'm sorry I was late, so I didn't hear everything that you said, so I do hope that I'm not going over old ground. As a psychologist, you're at the coalface, so you see very many levels of mental health. I understand that Canberra is in crisis at the moment in the field of mental health. Can you shed any light on why that is happening? Thank you.
Great question. How long do we have on this? I'll go back to the point. Yeah, Tom's like, get off. The first principle would say we work in a chronic emergency crisis care in mental health. I was supervising someone who's working in our child and adolescent mental health crisis team yesterday, and most of the intakes that they do, they say, are you actually going to completely complete suicide right now? If not, we're going to push you back out the door. Can you come back when you're even worse? And what we see in the physical and mental health arena is we're dealing with people when they're in chronic spaces of ill health, where eventually all you can do is keep people alive. You're not moving them to a state of optimal health where they can have a meaningful, purposeful life. We need to move to prevention and early intervention. I would say, and actually chatting to the student yesterday, and I was just saying in my campaigning, what do you think should be done? And she was saying, we need an early intervention system where we are dealing with people before it becomes chronic. And there's a multitude of this. At the prevention end, this is where, things like transport come in, how we have communities, how we have accessibility to on-the-ground healthcare that's not just going and seeing a psychologist, but it has to happen up here. The current system in mental health absolutely is not working. I know when I graduate, the first thing they do is they send you into the most challenging environment in child and youth protection or into child and adolescent mental health, where you're the most naive, you've got the least amount of skills, and you're dealing with immense complexity. And one of the examples I give of a case with anonymity is a child at the age of 11 who started being incredibly violent to his mother, would restrain her, keep her in there. At 11, she could kind of manage that. For 4 years, it went unchecked without support. They sought support from all the services. It wasn't deemed as bad enough. By the age of 15, he's now aggressively violent and uncontainable, and her life is at risk because we've missed all the stages along the way. And every day we hear examples like that. So I think it's a fundamental shift. It doesn't cost more. It means you've got to resource things differently and at this end of the spectrum.
So we're letting down the guilt person.
Oh my gosh, yes. And look, as a psychologist, like I said, I don't need the work. The advice to go and talk to a psychologist, go and talk to your GP. Great, in 9 months, I might be able to fit you in. Actually, 2028, I can get you in for an appointment. That's not appropriate. So if we can capture people now instead of a day earlier than tomorrow, our trajectory is completely different. And that's also about community care. It can't just be going to a psychologist to talk about your things. Maybe very quickly, I'll say the studies show us if we can support parents in the first 2 months of a child's life to reduce their stress, we see better life outcomes for the rest of that child's life and a phenomenal reduction on the impact of their use of the healthcare system, mentally and psychologically. There's places like Finland and Norway that will invest all of their time in making sure parents are supported for the first 2 months of life. And they see longer term changes. But we kind of often let people flounder. We don't give good parental support. We don't help reduce people's stress. And that has really long-term consequences. Thank you. Yeah.
Yep. My wife's due in November, so hopefully we fail and we get all sorts of success in that first support of the first 2 months.
Yes.
Yes. I was actually going to ask about, not so much the specific issues, but one of the principles, collaboration, as you know, and maybe reflecting on your experience in the corporate world. I'm not sure how often it's been the case that you've worked with people you might not agree with. Our conversations to me indicate you're kind of a progressively minded person. How do you think you would manage in a situation with people who maybe didn't share your views, didn't share your assumptions kind of about the world, and whether there's experiences you can speak to that give us an indication of how that might go?
Yeah, and I think that it definitely comes from my worldview, which I think the privilege of counselling work is I recognize we are way more similar than we are different. We are like 99.6% similar. And then we've got some differences. Our world today in social media and media is all about dichotomy. Are you for the tram or against the tram? I won't raise that issue. Are you vaccine or not vaccine? And then we get into this, well, let's not try and bring people together. Let's divide people more without recognizing fundamentally we're all pretty good people. We want a good, healthy, happy life. I think we need to be much more focused on how we take care of everybody. But one of the things I did recently is I had to go through and teach all of our federal politicians about how to not sexually abuse people and create safe and respectful work environments with really all of the different politicians, many of which I would hold on a day-to-day level very opposing views, but kind of coming in there, it's like, I'm a person, you're a person, and this is a great opportunity for me to brainwash you into my way of doing it. No, it's a great opportunity to connect. And what I found is we had so many similar ideals. And again, with the right education and connection and coming from we are very similar, we actually get a lot further along. I am really unhappy with the level of divisiveness that we are really almost surreptitiously brought into now. Social media and media is very much about me versus you. The thing is, and at a brain level, we know when people are operating in competitive reactive spaces, we start to focus on our differences. That doesn't progress us at all. So I think, yeah, coming from that place of open listening and learning, and ideally we want people to come around for the ride and fundamentally stay respectful. I think just because I disagree with someone doesn't mean we now go, which we often see in politics, to denigrate, undermine other people. That doesn't work really well for me. So I'm comfortable in that. Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yeah.
The greatest existential threat to all of us forever will no doubt be, climate change. Now, what can you do for Canberrans about that? I know that school children have been very vocal about this. How about the adult population, bringing them together rather than apart?
Yes. And this is probably the thing I'm most passionate about, because we quibble about all these things and no one realizes the demise of humanity is happening pretty quickly because of inaction on climate change, largely because of political agendas all over the planet and people investing in increasing their personal wealth instead of taking really good action. We should be a model city around climate change. This also means federal changes as well, so we've got to keep advocating at that level. I think what I would really like to see, and I know we've had a huge increase on spending in this area, like 1,000% over the last number of years, but I think we need to be the absolute model of this and learn from other cities and have other frameworks. One of the biggest levels of stress for our youth is what they call climate anxiety. They feel completely helpless and hopeless. There's this sense of, there is not going to be a future. The problem with that is then you don't take any action. And this idea of like, oh, well, China isn't going to change, so what shall we do? As soon as we focus on other people and that, lack of action, we all start to move into a space of not taking action. I think there's a multitude of things we can do, and it has to happen at many fronts. One is actually just constantly upset about the lack of sustainable building developments that we put in place, still whacking things up with no proper environmental sustainability, and part of that's about the building industry and regulation. But I think that's, we are going to be stuck with those things for the next 50, 60, 70 years, which is going to have a huge impact on emissions and other things. So it's complex, but I would say realistically for us as a species, it's the number one issue. It has to be. And it's constantly ignored because it's hard. But I think there's a lot of things we can do locally and we have to look at broadly to make some change. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, Sue. Kind of an issue that's related. I'm very passionate about the environment. And by the environment, I don't just mean climate change. Yeah. I mean biodiversity. I mean having money going towards parks and conservation. I've been incredibly disturbed about the fact that the current government, climate change is kind of like everybody understands climate change. They get it. The State of the Environment comes out once a year. Yeah. People go, oh, it's really sad we're losing all those species. Yeah. And go out into the reserves. I was at Pine Island yesterday, and it was just African lovegrass, St. John's wort, thistles. There were hardly any native plants. So my question is, beyond climate change, 3 factors that really keep us, our species going. invasive species and habitat loss. I mean, can we do anything about that, given that we have housing crisis, we have cost of living, we have health, we have education? How can we also deal with this critical issue?
Yeah, and I think we have to. Like, again, the money is being spent on various things in our community. It's about how effectively we're spending that. My first degree was in science and evolutionary kind of science, so biology. So I think, you know, this is not just, and climate change was a term devised psychologically for people to feel like it's something in the future. It's not local. It's not something we can have any impact on. Diversity of species, appropriate clean air, fresh water, keeping our spaces kind of available to have that biodiversity is really key. I know there's some programs around on this, but I think it has to be part of the agenda. You know, when you lose bees, when you don't have the right diversity, then we know we're in a pretty dire place. I think more broadly, we're pretty uncomfortable with how serious an issue this is. And I think what that means is there's lots of diversion away from it. It should be like, really, the nation should be stopping, and that's what we focus on, because the rest doesn't matter so much if we're not taking care of the environment and the day-to-day lived experience of that. So I think some allocation of spending has to be around that, but to do it really judiciously as well. Yeah, but it's something that I would be very passionate and interested in. Is that helpful or not helpful? Yeah. And I think then too often, particularly around this issue, I think most politicians do divert from it, because there is a deep discomfort with sitting with how serious the environment is. And I think that means that it's easy to push things away or not address it or not bring it to the forefront. That doesn't mean I have to have the answers, but it does mean appropriate consultation. What can we do? How do we address this? Are we allocating funding? Are we dealing with people appropriately? Are we providing opportunities for that to be addressed? We have some of the best scientists in the world. Most of them end up having to go overseas because we don't necessarily value it. We can draw on that. Appropriate think tanks, experts, ways of doing that, but we've got to actually we have to be open to it. And if you don't see it as an issue and you don't address it as an issue, it's not going to be addressed properly. And I think, and this is obviously I was brought up with time of Bob Hawke, where the idea is constantly think global, act local. So it's nice to think about the climate change, but I absolutely agree. What does that mean for what we can do here and now in our local environment? So that's, be very committed to that.
All right, last question. I think Sue.
Thanks, Sue. Look, just to reach back onto the psychology and the early intervention part, which, look, I personally believe you've nailed it. I had a really good conversation during the week with a doctor who owns a large practice up in regional New South Wales. And we had an in-depth conversation about the early intervention side of things. Now, as a white heterosexual male, I was brought up with the values that women are a treasured entity. And I'm not talking in a sexist way or they're not capable and they're not strong. What I'm talking about is they were something that was to be protected because that's just what we do as men. I think society has gone a little awry since I was brought up with those sort of moral values and all that sort of stuff. But I also look at the violence against women and go back to your point. So sorry, I'm dragging this question out. Do you believe, and I've had another conversation about this, do you believe that with the early intervention, that will also have a positive effect? And because males are too bravado and we're tough and we don't need to go to doctors or dentists and look, that's a downside of the male culture in this country. But do you believe if we get to that early intervention, that will have a flow-on effect to violence against women, to better home lives, better opportunities, and all those things? It just seems like it's a root cause, and we probably need to stop trying to put out the bushfire at the other end or the spot fire, and how about we take the fuel away at the very beginning? Am I getting that right? And I'd really like your take on it and see if it actually fits into the conversation I had.
Yeah, thank you. And these are really big questions. And I think, firstly, we've had over the years, At the emergency end of the spectrum, so domestic violence, crisis service and refuges, we often have seen really big cuts in our funding. So at the moment, unfortunately, we do have a crisis in terms of violence against women. I think it's been around for a long time, but it's increasingly getting worse, I think, for a couple of reasons. I think we have seen this shift, and I think we are seeing an undercurrent of men feeling disempowered, and that's showing up in not very healthy ways. In the interim, we have to properly and appropriately fund ways to get out of violent circumstances. Absolutely at the prevention end of the spectrum, and this is a whole psychological workshop I'm running next Sunday here. I think one of the ways we have to heal the planet, and that means how men and women and how we deal with the world, is until we make it acceptable for men to be vulnerable, the world is not going to change on many fronts. You know, it's like what I often see working with lots of trauma work, which is what I specialize in, and people in those violent situations. We often see men feel like, I feel hurt, I've got to hurt the thing that hurt me, because it's not okay to feel vulnerable. What that means is, on a multitude of fronts, men don't seek help physically or psychologically until it's way down the track, when we're now again dealing with crisis. But at a broader societal conversation, this idea of what does it mean to be a man? Is it okay to be vulnerable? I'm assuming you guys are all human, just like me, and you go through a multitude of really difficult experiences. We've got to take the shame away from that, because whilst there's shame, we see this reactivity. But I think the undercurrent, and there's a lot more kind of research and discussion around it, is this feeling disempowered, and so taking it out in very violent ways. And that's showing up in lots of parts of our community. I've been tracking for quite some time the number of deaths, intimate partner violence against women particularly. It's been shocking for some time. I think this year, for some reason, it's increased, but finally the media are paying attention, politicians are paying attention. And I would say if 37 men had been killed by their female partner this year, well, now I think it's 38 or probably 42 by today, the nation would stop. One man got hit in King's Cross, the whole world stopped, legislation was changed the next day, and things, our whole dialogue around that completely changed. We have a very high level of acceptance of violence against women. And even violence that occurs against men, unfortunately, majority of the time is from other men. Women do initiate violence, but it's not as impactful. And so this is a much broader conversation about accessibility, taking away shame, and at the prevention end of the spectrum. And again, you save a huge amount of money at this end of the spectrum when we start to change that dialogue. It's something I'm really passionate about, because I think our model for climate is power over the planet. Our model for dealing with things is power over. That doesn't work, and it's not working anymore. So thank you for that question.
Wrap it up there. Thank you, Sue.
Ooh. Thank you. Ooh, yes.
Thank you. Brilliant. Bravo. Thank you very much. I think that's it. I mean, we don't really need to say anything else. Thank you for coming along on a Sunday. Thank you, everyone, for coming along at short notice and hearing from Sue, asking some tricky questions, getting some answers. Anything that you wanted to... Oh, yes, you must volunteer. Is that right? Yeah.
And do 10 chin-ups before you leave.
Yeah, it's a reference. Yeah. Lock the doors. Look, if you're interested in being part of what we're doing and you haven't had a conversation yet with Lee or maybe with me, we could have a quick chat afterwards. Well, I've got to get back to my family as well. About what that could look like. We've got a really basic code of conduct here that we have anyone who's involved with the campaign. That includes all of the prospective candidates, anyone who's involved at all, management group and so on. They're signing that, grabbing t-shirts so they can start spreading the brand out a little bit, and having a conversation about how to get involved. There'll be a lot more to get involved with once we have our candidates finalized and we actually flip into campaign mode. We haven't been campaigning yet. We've been speaking with people, getting a sense of where they're at, what they'd like independents focusing on, and who the independents might be. But that's certainly the next phase, building that policy development, like I said before, and campaigning. So if you're interested in doing that, please come and have a chat with us, sign a code of conduct, grab a t-shirt, get out of here. But above all, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Sue. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon.